Hello, U.S. history students. And then this week, we've been working through World War I. Now, we've really flown through the war, okay? We're not in it very, very long. So, what I want to do with this lesson is just go through an overview of the key events, some of the key terms you need to know. These are the most important concepts that I think you need to take away from this unit. There is no quiz with this, okay? There are no notes. You can take your own notes. This will be a very, very quick presentation, okay? Now let's start with some key terms. These pictures right here are all the same thing, okay? World War One is known for this type of fighting, and that, of course, is trench warfare. Now, with trench warfare, you dig in, you dig trenches, okay? You try to get to the other trenches across what an area known as no man's land, all right? You're going to try to reach the other side, but people can see you coming. So they are very, very likely to shoot at you, okay? Attacks against trenches are often unsuccessful. So that results in a stalemate. Both sides dig in and they have to wait there because they cannot reach the other side, which is their objective. Part of the reason trench warfare becomes so deadly is because of these things: machine gun, poisonous gas, tanks. All of these represent industrial weapons. We talked about industrialization. You've got all these nations stockpiling these weapons. You've got all these nations competing to control territory. They're going to bring out these weapons in that competition. So when we talk about industrial weapons, this is what we're talking about: machine guns, grenades, tanks, airplanes, and especially poison gas. Now, another one of these industrial weapons that gets its own category is this right here. This, of course, is a submarine. Germany really capitalizes on submarine technology, okay? The undersea boats, the U-boats, all right? And of course, they're going to use these boats for unrestricted submarine warfare. This is one of the things that's going to drive us to get involved in World War I in 1917, is we are tired of Germany sinking ships in the Atlantic and disrupting our trade and our freedom of the seas. So those are some key terms, some key concepts I think you need to associate with World War I. Now let's move to the events, okay? And I'm going to tell you right now, wait until we get to the end to copy them all down. When does World War I start? It starts in 1914 with these two things. These are the two sides in the war: the Allied powers and the Central Powers. The war begins because of Archduke Ferdinand. Archduke Ferdinand gets assassinated by the Black Hand. The Black Hand is from Serbia. Archduke Ferdinand was from Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary is going to use that as an excuse to attack Serbia. Serbia calls on Russia. Austria-Hungary calls on Germany. Russia calls on France. Germany, to get to France, goes through Belgium. Belgium calls on England. And pretty soon, it's a world war between the Central Powers, which are in blue, and the Allied powers, which are in red. And when we join in 1917, we're going to join the Allied powers. Our next big event comes in 1915 when German U-boats sink the Lusitania. Okay, and we'll talk about more of that in just a second. 1917, we get the Zimmermann telegram. 1917, President Wilson calls for war in order to make the world safe for democracy. Why? Germany is violating our freedom of the seas. Plus, we have strong relations with Great Britain. Then in 1918, the war is over and the Allied powers have won. Those are the big events. Now, hold on a second, copying those down. Let me go through the illustrations here. So we got our two sides there. Okay, there's a newspaper headline mentioning the Lusitania, 1,000 probably are lost. We saw another newspaper that mentioned 1,260 are lost. Okay, there's our cartoon representing the Zimmermann telegram. There's President Wilson, and there, of course, is a U-boat representing that unrestricted submarine warfare on the part of the Germans. Right, and then there's a newspaper, armistice signed in the war. Okay. And there's some U.S. troops. We kind of turn the tide of the war in favor of the Allies. All right. Now, here are the events. This is what you need to copy down. We've already kind of talked about 1914. The war begins, why it begins, the triggering of the alliance system. 1915, U-boats sink the Lusitania as part of that unrestricted submarine warfare. Remember, the Lusitania was a passenger ship, but it was carrying ammunition. which was the exact thing that Germany was worried about. So Germany engaged in that unrestricted warfare, unrestricted submarine warfare, and let the world know, if we catch you in the Atlantic, we will sink your boats, because we don't know if you're carrying ammunition or not. Around the same time, 1917, we discover the Zimmermann telegram. Remember, after 1915, Germany kind of backs off of unrestricted submarine warfare. Then in 1917, it's going to pick back up with unrestricted submarine warfare. We're going to discover the Zimmermann telegram, or actually Britain discovers the Zimmermann telegram and gives it to us. Remember, Germany was asking Mexico to invade the U.S. as kind of a diversion, okay, to keep us occupied and out of the war in Europe. Also in 1917, Russia is undergoing its own revolution. Russia is going to leave. It is going to become communist. It's going to become known as the Soviet Union, which is kind of an opportune time for us to come into the war, because the Allies are now facing an onslaught of Central Powers who can now focus on the Western side, or the Western theater of the war. We're going to come in the war in 1917. Wilson calls for war against Germany because they are violating our freedom of the seas, because we have a closer relationship with Great Britain, and because we want to make the world safe for democracy. Now, remember, this is after Wilson campaigned in 1916 as the president that kept us out of war. But now, because of mounting pressure, because of world events, we can no longer ignore this conflict, and we have to get involved. And then by 1918, the war is over.
This is a code here for tenant. Dial 5701, please. 5701.
By 1918, sorry about that. By 1918, the war is over. The Allied powers have won. And why? Because our presence, our soldiers, our resources tip the balance in favor of the Allies and lead to a German defeat. So those are the key terms. Those are the key events that I think you need to know. Our last full lesson for this unit, our last full lesson for this week, is going to deal with the end of World War I, specifically the peace conference and the differences between Wilson and his idea for peace and the rest of the Allies and their idea for peace.